G'day folks, this is the original concept for my manual point levers. As you can see, this lot is just cut out of 10mm by 3mm aluminium flat bar, and I was also working on a sliding rod to go within a hinge to activate the point. So I was playing around with these rods and wires for a while and sort of doing mock-ups to see how it would look. And I also cut some aluminium arch bar to sort of simulate the frame to see what it's going to look like. And I set them up on my pool table in between a couple of decks of cards to see what they'd look like. And then we went from there. So it was a matter of trying to put something together and get it to work. So we just played around with this for a while, and then we moved on. So I cut some levers by hand and made up some connections with terminal block inners, and I set up an area on my workbench where I could start testing this sort of system to see how it would work. I was trying all sorts of different things to get it to work, and originally I was using wire in cable, like a brake cable sort of setup, if you like, and that seemed to be the way to go at the time. And so I sort of persevered with that for a while, and wasn't quite sure about it. So I did further experiments, and anyway, in the end, I came up with something that I think is workable. In the end, I decided to redesign the lever because I couldn't see myself cutting every one of them by hand, and also I couldn't achieve a consistent result. So I came up with a design that I felt was okay, and I decided to get the levers laser cut. I found a firm not too far from where I live that could do it for me, and I changed the design slightly. You can see that the large hole is now above the small hole if you look back to the plans, but fundamentally that was it. And then I started experimenting with different setups for the connection for wires or rods, and so these pictures are showing some of the fiddling about I did to try and achieve something that was workable, and it came along quite nicely after a while. You know, you get those eureka moments where you say, oh, that's it, that's the way to go. And it's all about starting, I guess, with a complicated setup, and then paring it down, making it simpler and simpler until you find something like this that's showing now that actually works. Just a simple connection, a terminal block inner, or chock block as you call them, connected to the lever by a screw and a couple of washers, and the terminal block inner then can accept cable or rod, and it's all very simple. And there you go. That's how it looks. And then what I needed to do then was a lot of testing to make sure that it was going to stand up to quite a good deal of use. So that was the next stage. Bell cranks were made from plastic moulding, which is called quad here in Australia, and it's very easy to cut. I set up a jig on my scroll saw so I could cut accurate 3mm wafers each time. This is a comparison between a wafer and the original idea in aluminium. And then it was just simply a matter of drilling 3mm holes in each wafer, one for the post and two for the terminal block inners. And of course then once the bell crank was made, it had to be tested quite thoroughly to see if it would stand up to a reasonable amount of punishment, because being plastic, you know, you would think with metal parts going through it it should fail fairly quickly. Fortunately, that was not the case, but I had to find that out anyway. Once the bell crank was sorted out, then we needed a proper post to suit it. So 50mm nail, 2.8 millimeters was used, and a 3mm thread was put on the end of it to accept a couple of nuts and washers to anchor the bell crank. And these proved to work out very well. They're very cheap, and the nail is just tapped into the board. Right, folks, we've done our testing, and now we have a design for the frame as per this drawing here. So now it's time to make the parts and start putting the whole thing together. The first thing, of course, is the rocker arms. There's 10 of those. It's a 10 lever frame, and also we have the fittings for those just there, ready to go on. And then we also have to put the fittings on the 10 levers as well, and you'll see those coming up. And then we put the whole thing together by gripping the bracket for the rod in the vise and then assembling the levers onto it. And there'll be a short video coming to show you how that's done. So this shows you the preparation.
First thing that has to be done is attaching the threaded rod to a bracket. This is a 25mm right angle bracket, and I've got a nylock nut on the end, and the end of the rod is flush with the end of the nut, and then there's a spring washer, then the bracket, then a spring washer, and then another nylock nut, and that's tightened up really tight to hold the thing in place. And then we follow a similar formula. After this first nylock nut, there's a spring washer, and then a flat washer, and then the lever, then a flat washer, spring washer, nut, etc., and on it goes. So I've cut the rod just a little bit longer than what the frame will be, and I'll trim that off once the frame is completed. So what we've got here at the moment is one lever being prepared, so I'll put the second flat washer on, and then we add the spring washer, and then we add a nylock nut. Now I have all these nylock nuts facing the one direction. No particular reason, it just seemed to make sense. So we have to wind that on quite a fair way. Now once we get close to where the nut is going to finish up, I just put a drop of Loctite on the thread, Even though these are nylock nuts and they're supposed to lock in place, this is just a bit of insurance, because you don't want to be winding all these things off again. So what I do is tighten it up and have it so that the lever is quite firm in its movement. You don't want a sloppy movement. You don't want it too tight. That's just a tad too tight. Just loosen that off a bit. Compare it to the one next door and so on. Just a bit more. Fraction of a turn makes all the difference. Right, that's fine. And then away we go again.
Well, there you go, folks. That's how it's put together, and it's exactly the same for the rocker arms that go behind the box. And you can see here that one of the rocker arms is going on to the shaft, exactly the same procedure as we did with the levers, because it has to mirror the levers exactly. They have to line up. And then we moved into creating a box to house all of this hardware, and measurements were made and taken, etc. Things were cut and holes drilled to suit where the levers were going to go. And then of course there's the test fitting, and the idea was that that little low front of the box has to be removable so that you can access the levers for maintenance. And then the rocker arms were matched up on the back so that they would line up properly, and then we were fitted connecting rods between the two lots of levers using just coat hanger wire over a short length. It's very strong actually, and this is the arrangement, how it looks when it's put together. There's still extra parts to go into the box yet. We need to put some aluminium angle in there to form a backstop for the levers, and it also acts as a rest for the combing that goes on and in between the levers on the top. There's another view of the connecting rods, and now we move into the angle being prepared. Little bits have to be cut out of both ends of it, and you'll see that in the next shot here. Yeah, there we are. And then of course there's fitting it to the box, and several holes, 3 holes actually had to be drilled. And I also prepared a bit of 10mm flat bar to go behind the angle as a spacer, just to it's removable, and actually these days on most of them I've removed the spacer just to give me a bit more throw. So you can see the preparation there for the angle for the front part of the box, and here's what it looks like once the angle's in. Now the next stage here is not really relevant anymore, but I created the first lot of combing using the aluminium arch bar, and I had to cut segments out and fit them in between the levers, and I just super glued the separate pieces to the aluminium angle, and this proved to be very fragile. Even though it looks like $1 million, it proves to be very fragile, and I've discarded that method. I've made up a new system using actually ice lolly sticks, paddle pop sticks if you want to call them that, and a timber affair in other words, and that's much more durable. Even though this looks much better, the timber is much more durable. So we moved on from this section here into preparation for painting and finishing the box, of course. And the parts were airbrushed to make it look a bit more like a real box, I suppose, or a real frame. And the timber was varnished and sort of worked to give it a sort of an old care-forward look. And then the levers were painted not in proper railway tradition, but to match the colour coding system that I've got for my track. Each circuit has its own colour code, so these levers relate to points on that particular part of track. And also the levers were numbered. That's a thing that I've carried on with the new system as well. You've got to know the numbers of the levers. You know, when you've got 25 levers, you need to know what's what. You don't want to be second guessing. And then this is how it all looks when it's put together. And obviously, as I said before, this has to be mounted below baseboard. But this particular frame, the first one, the 10 lever frame, I'm fairly proud of it. I thought it was a great success, and from that I've built another two, and I'll show you those later on. But yeah, this is how it's come up. Now, it's all well and good that it looks very pretty and looks very prototypical, I suppose, but the blessed thing has to work. So I think it's time that we saw this thing installed, and you can see how it actually works. And now an overall view. This system at the moment takes up approximately half of the main baseboard. So you can see as we start from the lever frame, it's quite complicated as it passes down to the far end of the board where it ends. And you can see some of the work that was done along the bottom edge as well. All numbered so that I can find them later on when I'm looking for them. It all looks different when you look from underneath. Everything's backwards and upside down, so it can get a bit confusing, so therefore the labelling helps quite a bit. Right, this is point number 11, and you can see the bell cranks moving. Number 12, a bit further down here, and so on. Number 13. Now I can't move 14 without 15 being moved first. That's a three-way point, so 15 moves into that position, and then 14 can go like that, etc. You can hear the micro switches clicking as the thing works. So there you are. This will give you an idea of what's involved in the movement. This is number 7 still, so we pull the lever back. Backwards and forwards. And if you just keep your eye on the bell cranks and the little bit just coming out of the hinge, the actuator I call that. Here's a fancy one down the bottom. And this one has a bit of rod bent over the top of another piece of rod there on the left, a right angle into the hinge, and it has a sort of a spring effect in the arm when it moves. You can hear the point clicking as it locks into place. All very smooth. Now here we are, folks, on the other side of the board, and I'm going to attempt to show you these 2 points working. I'm doing this backwards and upside down. I can't see the levers from here, so just bear with me. I've got to try and find the correct lever there. 22 should be this one, I think. There we go. That's what it looks like on top of the board. We'll try the one next to it. You can see you can move it as fast as or as slow as you like. You're getting plenty of contact with the blades.
It's probably actually better with points that don't have the latching spring in them. But I wasn't prepared to go through and take those out. I could if I wanted to eventually, I suppose, but I haven't bothered at the moment. So there you go.
Okay, as I mentioned before, this is the new version of the combing for the levers, just made out of ice lolly sticks or paddle pop sticks, whatever you want to call them. They stick together quite easily, and they also stick to the aluminium angle very well, and they were just the right size to fit in between the levers. And then a bit of card was added on the left and right hand sides to dress it up a bit. And then of course they were airbrushed, and now you can see the combing going into the boxes they were meant for. Already it's starting to look a bit more like combing as opposed to sticks. You can see the boxes being prepared there. There's actually 2 boxes to be done in this series, and then we've varnished the boxes, and I've also created signal box diagrams to go in the back of each box. Each one is relevant to its particular box, and now here we are with the box fully assembled and ready to go, ready to be installed onto the railway layout. So that's it, folks. That's the end of the story. So I hope you've enjoyed that. I'll see you next time. Cheers, Gormo.